Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Mcdermott, and I think everybody knows Robert. I believe that Robert, in the early with the Madhugiri Center on the East Coast in upstate New York, which was founded under the vision of the mother as a Sri Aurobindo center in this country, and at that point onward, he very strongly resonated with the philosophy of integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, Dr. Chaudhuri. Later, he met Dr. Chaudhuri and collaborated, and they published things together. And of course, he much later down the road, in the late 80s and beginning in 1990, started to be our previous president for 9 years, and he is still with us as the chair of Philosophy, Cosmology, Consciousness Department, which is one of the great departments that he actually helped found. And we have some presentations from that department, especially Integral Ecology panel later with Sean Kelly. I welcome Robert. Robert is going to talk about our connection all the way back from the teachings of the Gita to the present day. I don't know what else, but look forward to hearing from you, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Barman, and thank you for arranging this and yet another Founders Day symposium. It's always quite a wonderful event, and I'm sure today will be the same. And it's a pleasure to be speaking in front of Rita and Chipra, who honor us, and of course in the presence of Dr. Chaudhuri. We don't worship these pictures that we have around, but we do count on them to remind us of our mission, our founding mission and vision, which I think was really quite inspired, as I think Joe explained very ably. In fact, I think that we are probably, in some important respects, closer to the mission, and with a more sort of active affection for the founding and the founders than in the past. And I credit Joe for that achievement, because it's very, as he said, it's very easy to drift off and the latest, whatever. But Joe is very conscious in keeping that lineage alive explicitly. In the past, there have been people who've been aware and carried it and cared, etc. But when the president speaks about the lineage, that's very important. Well, I'm speaking about one of my very, very favorite topics, a topic that I've been carrying around in my head and writing about and thinking about for, well, Bauman already gave away some dates, but certainly for since 1970, when I met Dr. Chaudhuri and Bina Chaudhuri here in San Francisco and visited the academy, and we talked about Sri Aurobindo and the mother and etc. And then we edited together and wrote together. And so I have been carrying this thought of what is it to have for an academic institution to have a spiritual mission or to have a spiritual dimension. So when I was offered the position of president in 1970, I had the great fortune of being introduced by a mutual friend to Lawrence Rockefeller, and he brought me into his office, which was quite an august experience for me, because that's a building where I had delivered shirts in high school. And there I was back, there's a Matisse here and a Gauguin there, and turned out he was quite a wonderful man. But his first question is ingrained in my memory. He said, "So, body, mind, and spirit. What do you mean by spirit?" And I say, well, I thought to myself, there are probably millions of dollars at stake in this answer. and indeed, it's true. I guess I gave a good answer, because we did get millions of dollars. And partly because of our mission, body, mind, and spirit. And some people have said over the years that the integral in this institution means body, mind, and spirit. And it's not a bad conception, and it's quite good educationally. It works well for us. At the same time, I think there's another meaning, not one to replace that, but though in a certain sense that replaced the original. So let me speak about the original, which comes, I believe, from the Bhagavad Gita, which then was written about, well, first experienced, and then written about by Sri Aurobindo and Haridas Chaudhuri. So you all know you all have different areas of expertise, so if I say something that's so obvious, you'll forgive me, but I'm trying to keep in mind people who know something but not something else. And so what is it that how would it all hang together for you? So I want to begin by saying something about the Bhagavad Gita itself, which some people think is the Indian New Testament. It's not quite accurate, but it gets you started. It's a very important scripture. It's a revelation. It comes from a god named Krishna, because as soon as you go into India, there are lots of gods, right? That's one thing you have to sort of, when you cross to India, you just have to deal with the fact that we now are dealing with many gods. So, you just can't have one god. And there seems like there isn't only one. So I take seriously that Krishna is a god, and I hope you do. So in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a story, and that's quite a good thing, that there's a revelation from the divine to the human, that's a story. And so the story is there's a battle, and Arjuna, who is sort of us, every human is this Arjuna, and he has a crisis. He's expected to fight in this war and kill all these people whom he knows and admires, uncles and cousins and whatever, and they're all going to be killed. It's like World War I. The last person standing will be the winner. So he turns around and he says to Krishna, the god, he doesn't know he's a god yet because this is only chapter 1, and he says, hell no, I won't go. I'm not fighting this war. And Krishna says, oh yes, you will. So that's chapter 1. There are 17 more chapters to go, during which Krishna not only tells him why he will fight, he tells him 5 times, by the way. All of you pacifists, this is a hard text. He's 5 times he said, now get out there and throw those spears, and if you get stuck with a spear, that's just too bad, because it's all preordained anyway. And then in the course of it, he gives Arjuna, all mixed in different verses that you have to sort of figure out, teaching on knowledge, action, love, and something to do with meditation, contemplation, spiritual practice. So people usually say there are 3 yogas: knowledge, action, love. But really there's a 4th, something to do with meditation and calming and being receptive. Okay, so I'd like to say something about all 4 with respect to the Gita, to Sri Aurobindo, to Haridas Chaudhuri, but also to CIIS. All right? So in a masterpiece of spiritual teaching, Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga. He has a chapter on the yoga of spiritual knowledge, namely the kind of practice which could enable you to have knowledge of the divine in daily life, but also transcendently. And then there's knowledge of this spirituality or spiritual practice, the divine action, acting without attachment to the fruits of your action. Just do what is right because it is right. Because it's holy, it's divinely sanctioned, which you've learned which things are divinely sanctioned because you've already developed spiritual knowledge. So now you have enough knowledge to do what you should do. So at the end, Arjuna, who now knows Krishna, knows that he should fight. And because this is what is necessary at that time to bring about a different result than the present, which was an unjust situation with the wrong people ruling. Okay. And then the climbing the ladder from knowledge and action in chapter 9, that Arjuna, who's come a long way in about 47 pages, is now ready for this vision of Krishna, who is overwhelming, who includes gods and goddesses and divinities of all kinds and past civilizations. And Arjuna has now been brought to the point where he can see this without being blinded and collapsing and being overwhelmed. That's kind of exciting to get this. Right? It's a little bit like the Transfiguration, but if you remember, those klutzy guys who with Jesus couldn't actually endure what they were invited to see, right? And Jesus had to say, "You guys couldn't stay awake for an hour?" All right. Well, Arjuna did better. And he then has this experience and describes it in sort of this amazing vision of, and then, of course, when you have a vision like that, you fall in love. All right? So he's now transformed by love of Krishna. And then throughout, there's various kinds of advice on meditation and etc. Now, Sri Aurobindo and Haridas Chaudhuri wrote, I still think, the best book on Sri Aurobindo. I also think it's Dr. Chaudhuri's best book. It's a very penetrating, beautiful book about Sri Aurobindo called Prophet of the Life Divine. The prophet announcing the future of humanity. Right? A wonderful book. All right. So they then, first Sri Aurobindo and then Haridas Chaudhuri, add another yoga. Right? So the knowledge, action, love, meditation. They then say, but all of these 4 yogas, sometimes they talk 3, sometimes they do 4, have to be integrated, harmonized in one way of life. The transformation of the individual, of society, of the whole of history is gathered up by what they call the evolution of consciousness. And this is Sri Aurobindo's own language, because after all, he wrote 29 of his 30 volumes in English. Evolution of consciousness is what is under, behind, forward of, above, surrounding history. The whole process of change is the evident level of what is really happening, what's going on underneath, or in front, or behind. Some patterns, some spiritual, divine patterns of change, of history, of realization. Evolution, not just history, but evolution of consciousness. So consciousness is the key word. In fact, under Joe's leadership and Leslie Combs' directorship, we're creating a multidisciplinary center for consciousness, a perfect thing for this institution to do, because lots of actions can look the same, but if the consciousness is different, then the deeds are different. So this is really what we're about. So Sri Aurobindo then wrote about the yogas in relation to the task of the time, to know what is happening in the time, to know the need for global unity, for human unity, the need for a sense of the future, the creation of matter, of the material, including the human body, which he then collaborated on with his spiritual collaborator, Mira Richard, who we usually refer to as a French woman, but actually her parents were Egyptian and Turkish, and who moved to France the year before she was born. And you have to say this is destiny, and I was going to say God's will, but I want to say specifically Krishna's will, because they then created this ashram beginning in 1926, when Sri Aurobindo named her the mother of the ashram. And they then worked together till 1950, when Sri Aurobindo left his body, and according to their account, well, I shouldn't say their account, I should say the mother's account, that they continued to work together for yet another transformation called the supermental, or the descent of the supermind. Now, this was the second great event that Sri Aurobindo wrote about. The earlier one was his relationship to Krishna. So one of the reasons, there are several reasons, that I'm focusing on the Bhagavad Gita in terms of the spiritual mission of this institution is because when Sri Aurobindo, then he was just Aurobindo Ghosh, all right, a Bengali by way of England, by way of revolutionary politics, put in jail by the British government of India to get him out of the way. While in the Alipur jail in 1909, he memorized the Bhagavad Gita, recited it, and experienced Krishna's presence. Not yet as a descent, but as a vision. And he said he could feel the murderers and the jailers being held, just like in the war, the Bhagavad Gita, held in one unifying vision. So Krishna has a way of reconciling opposites. All right, so he had that experience. Then he went down to Pondicherry, and he meditated, wrote books, and the mother came, and they recognized each other, and the Mira Richard said, "Oh, Aurobindo Ghosh, you are just like the Krishna who has appeared to me in my dreams." And of course he said what the gurus always say, "I've been waiting for you, what have you been doing?" All right, so now that we've met, we will do this together. And then the war came, and she went to Japan, they came back, and then they set up, etc. Then in 1926, he had this, what I take to be, it's kind of mysterious, what I take to be a descent of Krishna into his being, into Sri Aurobindo's karmic, psychic reality. Whoever, whatever he was at that moment, received Krishna in some special transformative way. So that then what he did thereafter somehow has something to do